When you think about becoming a better investor, what do you think that means? Does it mean getting better at predicting trends and changes in the future? That could make sense. Perhaps it means observing market events and changing your strategy quickly to react to new market forces and maximizing your returns. That also seems to make sense. But what if that was all wrong? One day, Warren Buffett was driving with a friend. At the time, there was some economic uncertainty, and the friend was worried about the stock market and what that could mean for Warren's investments. Warren then asked a friend, "Do you know what the best-selling candy bar was in 1962? Well, the friend says he wasn't quite sure. Buffett told him it was Snickers. Then, Warren asks the friend what the best-selling candy bar is today. Snickers. We live in a world where it seems like everything is changing. Politics, technology, music, wars, nations, the youth. But actually, there's also a lot of things staying the same that we might not notice or realize. And a lot of those things are down to the core aspects of human nature. Warren Buffett, of course, understood this, which is why he invests in value-based companies that would still be a good business regardless of passing trends. And to be a good investor, and just to make good plans in life in general, it is incredibly hard to predict the things that do change. But there are many things that don't change that we can rely on. Jeff Bezos is famous for saying that he knows that in 5 years' time or 50 years' time, his customers will always want lower prices and faster delivery times. It's just part of what humans want. This means that Amazon can make very big investments in infrastructure to support lower prices and faster deliveries. It's guaranteed that by investing in those features, it will be a good business decision that his customers will want. It's very hard to predict exactly what product will be trending within the Amazon store next month or next year, but people will always want things faster and cheaper. And on that, today we are going to review some of my favorite lessons from Morgan Housel's brilliant book, Same as Ever, which is all about this principle and the psychology of human nature and the things that don't change. Morgan Housel is a fantastic writer and thinker, and he consistently gives incredible advice around psychology, finance, and life decisions. So, welcome to the Growth Mindset Psychology Podcast, diving into the science of self-improvement with me, Sam Webster Harris. And today's topic is the laws of human nature that don't change and how they can help us understand how people will universally react in the same ways under different scenarios and how we can better future-proof our own decisions in life. Joining me on the show today is Nicolas Vereecke, my co-host from my book review show, Wiser Than Yesterday podcast, where you can find various other book reviews if you are interested. But today it is all about the book Same as Ever, which has over 12 chapters, each covering a main weighty topic. And instead of giving you a blow-by-blow summary of everything in the book, we recommend that you actually get the book at some point. And for now, we're going to cover our absolute favorite lessons that we feel are the most practical and why we think they are relevant, what we're taking away from the book, how it applies to our lives. And I think that leads to what could be the most useful episode that we could create here. So stay tuned to find out more about what doesn't change in life. Alrighty, welcome to the show, Nico.
Hello there. It has been a while since we recorded. So I think both of us, Sam, are now recording from a different location. So we both moved country. I'm calling in from Germany, where I moved, and Sam's calling in from Porto,
Yes.
around Porto.
So lots of life things going on for the last 2 months. Still lots of reading, just struggling just to keep up with basic work. It's finally some time to geek out again.
So we are here to discuss the best lessons from Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever. I loved the book and I think we have a lot to talk about. Can you tell me what you thought about it?
We both really enjoyed it. It was a good book about the intersection of money and human nature and all the complicated things and all the mistakes that we tend to make. Same as Ever it's extremely easy to read. You finish the book before you even realize it. I'll start by saying that I think he's really good at making relatively complex topics easy to understand with good examples. That being said, like we can go into this, right? But there's a bunch of things in this book. And maybe to summarize at a high level what the book is, you and I, when we read Nassim Taleb, we talked about the Lindy Principle quite a bit. And the Lindy Principle is something that has been existing or has been done for a long time before, is likely to be done or to exist for a long time in the future. And so the older something is, the more likely it is to be there still in the future. And this is true for ideas. This is true for ways of governing countries. It is true for books. It is true for like drinks. And this book talks essentially like looks at human behavior through the lens of the Lindy Principle.
100%.
Alrighty, now we've covered the main principles of the book, let's kick off with an organized run through of our greatest takeaways from some of the best ideas that are wrapped up in this book and how listeners and ourselves can use them in our own lives.
Okay, let's go one at a time. You can start.
So first one is progress is hard to see. So good news is the deaths that don't take place, the diseases you didn't get, the wars that didn't happen, tragedies avoided. And it's hard to like contextualize or imagine, let alone measure them. But bad news is visible every day. You get it all the time, a terrorist attack, the war, car accident, pandemic, stock market crash. And we just don't really see all these good things that are happening around us. And we also don't project them into the future in terms of we don't really understand compounding, because 1% better every year is huge. If you get a 2.5% salary increase each year, that's like you double your salary in 15 years kind of thing. And it's just really hard to see all this great stuff around us. And we just look back with these, we can imagine the good stuff that used to be there and we forget the bad things that were there. And we have this terrible version of reality and where it's going, basically.
Yes, 100% true. And I think this is a consequence of evolution, where our priority in life as humans is to survive. And like survival is key. And so everything else is essentially like, is less important than just surviving. And to survive, you just need to be aware of risks and of dangers and of things that could go wrong. And so I think that a tendency to overemphasize or being drawn to the negative is just a consequence of us, through evolution, being like trained or adapted to focus on the negative, just because that is generally what keeps us alive. Now, in society today, you're not at risk of dying every day anymore, really, or not, at least not. There's not a large chance, and so we have kept this like need for drama or this draw to the negative. So that results itself in one thing, for example, like, I don't know if this was an anecdote of a book or somewhere else, but some person tried to start a newsletter or like newspaper, which basically talked about all the good things that happened, and it went out of business. Yeah, but there was almost no demand because people don't care. Right? If you think about what you social media is it's always drama. It's always like bad things. And so, as you say, we are bad at thinking exponentially, and that's like good things happen through compounding and bad things happen through black swan events. It takes 5 years to build up a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. I think that's Warren Buffett that said that. But yeah, it's like all of these things are connected, where things can go bad really quickly. And that's why we're also drawn to that and focus on that. And it just takes longer for things to go right, because for good things to happen, it's always a function of compounding.
And we don't really understand compounding as a principle. And yeah, we just don't know why to see these things. And also, I think just the way your imagination works in terms of we tie into stories and we make those things seem really possible. Because if we have predisposition to pay attention to bad news, we see all these stories and we can imagine those stories happening, but we don't spend a lot of time imagining all these different possible good stories, all these things that are going on. And there's a study where they ask people like the likelihood of something really unlikely happening, like an earthquake in California causing a dam to break and flooding a bunch of homes or something. And people gave it like a 10% chance versus the statistical likelihood of just a freak weather event happening in America, which they gave like a 5% chance, even though it's like 100 times more likely. But because when you have a specific story, you just imagine it in your head, and so you can see it happening. But when it's just like something ambiguous and fluffy, you can't imagine it. So just all the stuff that isn't happening or that is good, like the war that didn't happen, you just don't think about it. in the way that you can, yes, there's a war in Gaza. I know about it. War is happening. It's bad. Everything in the world is bad. But like all of the amazing stuff of all the people who aren't killing each other right now doesn't really enter my brain as something that's incredible. So I think that's one thing. And then you spoke about like the black swan events, and there was the other concept he talks about is the risks you don't see, which kind of ties very much to this, like we don't see the positivity. We also don't see all the risks, and it's the risks that you don't see that are the worst things. So lots for the stuff that you don't prepare for, like we didn't prepare for COVID, which is why it was such a problem. And risk is what's left after everything you have accounted for. So Nassim Taleb is like invest in preparedness, not prediction. And the most resilient you can be is always going to have a lot of balancing and stuff. As in, sure, you can invest in Bitcoin or whatever, but maybe there's no internet. I don't know. You can maybe expand on that point better than me.
It's a really interesting point. And yeah, it reminds me of my job as an investor. Right? I need to invest in startup companies. And I've learned through experience that if I can't tell you or explain what could go wrong in a business, I don't understand it well enough to be able to invest in it. That's like a fundamental like lesson I've learned, right? If something sounds too good to be true, it's probably not true. And so like that's one big lesson I've learned. Another lesson, and I think it's related to this, it's something I've been thinking about recently. Funds like mine, like I operate in the crypto area, the crypto space. And so there are a bunch of crypto funds, and funds, they take money from institutional, often investors, or at least like rich people, and they invest that in like startups, in teams, and in projects. So our customers are capital allocators, or people that, allocate large amounts of capital. So we have competition for that capital, and competition for that capital is other funds generally. The problem in our space is that there are investors, other funds that have taken incredibly risky decisions that have ended up paying off in a major way, but they are able to boast incredible like returns without having to talk about all of the ridiculously stupid risks they took. We look at the returns, but we tend to not look at all of the risks they had to take to get there. And so within the crypto space, that
people judge decisions based on results, not the accuracy of the decision, like statistically, as in like how sensible it was. As in, I could do something really stupid, but if it actually plays out, people are like, oh, you're a genius, but actually it's just an accident. Should have given a specific example, but
it's funny how we're like in this first point, we're both making the case that people are overemphasizing risks, and then we're also making the case that people don't think about risks enough, which is paradoxical.
Paradoxical points are important. That's usually where most of the value is in things. Also in traits in humans, like Steve Jobs being like super big thinker, but super analytical, etc. And it's usually the things that are closest to paradox opposites that have a lot of value to understand. Otherwise you're being too one way. Like Derek Sivers' book about how to live, like every chapter is just opposite to each other, and each of them make complete sense. And good. Still feel like I should come up with a better example for risky behaviors that are useful. As in, if you go all in on blackjack and stuff where like you just don't actually know, and you can be a terrible player and go all in and win. Whereas like someone that actually understands poker can work out what is the best decision to make and why you should be making it or not.
Yeah, there are tons of examples. One of my frustrations is that, as I said, I operate within the crypto space, and there's a bunch of pretty young people who have made super irresponsible financial decisions that have ended up paying off. Because they made a lot of money, they think they're incredible investors and they understand the world better than anyone else. While in reality, they just got lucky. And the risk reward of their bet was from an investment point of view. So they're not good investors, but they think they are. And people will also think they are because they have a lot of money. So it's this interesting space. And I'm always wary of these young people that think they're absolutely genius and just don't get blown away by their money, and just think about what they're saying and the decisions they're making. And I think time will tell, like in the long run, people that make stupid risk-adjusted decisions will lose out. And I think that you can get lucky once, you can get lucky twice, but to be consistently lucky, I think is what this
The human has the self-serving bias. So if a politician wins, it'll be because they're so good and people love the way they give speeches and their policies. If they lose, it's because of voting was unfair or something wasn't nice. or CEO has a really good year in the company is because of their strong leadership. If the year is bad, it's like economic problems, etc. And just the way we explain our behaviors and our wins, like it's always down to us. And we just don't factor in like how much luck there was that was going on or how much help we had from other people. And it's just over time that starts to come in. And I think, although I do in some ways think that wisdom and maturity isn't purely just a factor of time and experience, there are some things that you can't substitute time and experience for. And you just need to have 10 years investing into make some mistakes to really understand, because people will tell you about this stuff, but you just don't really acknowledge them until you've made them yourself and be like, oh yeah. In the same way, like you can break your bones, but you just don't know it until you've done it. And when you're like 20 and you've never had any major like life problems, you don't really think about dying too much. But when you hit 40 and you've been in a car crash and nearly died a few times or something, and like you're just aware that like you will be killed at some point, whether that's just in your bed or through doing something stupid. And it's the same with investing, really. Like your money will disappear if you put it in something that's risky, and it goes to zero. It's totally, it can happen.
Yeah, and it ties into one major takeaway from the book for me, and it's all about like happiness and expectations. And the point the book makes, and I wholeheartedly agree, is that happiness is a function of like expectations more than anything else. It's not a function of the situation you're in. It's a function of the situation you expect it to be in. And so if you managing expectations is the best way to remain happy. The problem is that we are very bad at this. We are dreamers and we want more. We always want more. And there's expectation inflation. There's lifestyle creep, and we always want more. We always want better. And I think this also, like a way this manifests itself is, I think that the most successful people are almost never the happiest, because in order to be very successful, you have to be constantly unhappy about where you are, and you always have to want more. And I think that is a personality trait more than anything else. And so I think that for ultra successful people like Elon Musk and others, the thing that they have in common is that they always expect better and always expect more and always drive themselves to achieve more. And that is how they got so successful. But it also means that they're never quite satisfied with where they are.
This leads into a different point he makes, but also I feel like a lot of the things he's talking about are just balancing these different opposing forces to get like the right level for you. As in, like, you do need to have expectations on yourself to try for things, and you do need to put yourself through some hardness to get there. But also they can be really bad. As in, I was in Barcelona with my girlfriend, and there was things rowing, and she had this expectation that we were going to go rowing, that it was going to be lovely, and we'd do it together on both sides of this boat and something. But she didn't tell that to me. I got in the boat. I was like, cool, I'll start doing it. And she wanted to go the opposite direction to where the boat went. I was like, what are you doing, you idiot? That's not how the boat works. I'll just do it. And then she was pissed off at me because I said I'd do it. And like, why would we both do it? These are independent oars. This isn't going to work. It didn't work. And then eventually we worked out that she had an expectation that was quite different to what I had as an expectation, because I've spent lots of years rowing and I know how to row a boat. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I know what you want. And that took me 5 minutes to work out. Sorry. And it's just sort of silly stuff that you have in your head that like you just haven't communicated to yourself even sometimes, that can annoy you. And it's really funny. But he also has a chapter around like the benefits of stress and urgency for like innovation. Military is the biggest force of innovation, generally speaking, like the internet, supersonic jets, etc. It's all come from like a major need to have it. And people who worked with Steve Jobs, like he was a terrible boss, would push people to unrealistic lengths. It was awful. And they'd all say they'd work for him again because they'd done like the best work of their career, even though it was crazy stressful. And stress and urgency can be really nice to get the best out of yourself. So you don't want to be too happy and too relaxed. And I'm trying to find this right balance for myself in terms of, I don't want to be Elon Musk. I don't want to be constantly stressed and trying to do everything. But I've moved to Porto. I live near the beach. I can go surfing. I run a podcast. I have like probably the most chill life of most of my friends that I know. But trying to get the balance of like still working hard and maybe having an all-nighter once or twice a month is a good thing. And having some like marathon projects where I just like, okay, I'm just going to go stupidly lock myself in an office for 3 days and just do hard things, is a thing you have to work out for yourself to get the best out of yourself. whilst also being able to waste time. Because if you want to be a creative person, just sitting at your desk isn't always a good thing. You actually need to have some unproductive moments. Taleb says his only measure of success is how much time do you have to kill. And so if you have a completely optimized calendar, you're also doing things wrong because of you need to just take a walk in the park and have weird stuff come to you. So there's lots of these different balancings of stress and urgency, or just having zero time, like zero things on your calendar. And yeah, getting it right as a human is hard, but that's, I don't know, it's just about balancing.
It's probably like one of the 5 most important things to balance in like modern life. It's essentially like balancing your drive to do hard things, which will give you like long-term satisfaction, and like expectation setting and being happy with what you have. Two thoughts there.
Well, stay tuned to hear Nico's ideas on balancing drive and satisfaction, and a lot more after the break that is sadly necessary to keep the show alive. Some things will never change, as we have been discussing, like me needing to feed myself. So hopefully you enjoy the adverts, but if not, do feel free to skip them. For 30,000 years, men have been wrestling with their hair. Archaeological records show that they even used sharpened clamshells and shark teeth to deal with it. In fact, shaving wasn't popularized until Alexander the Great forced all of his men to shave so that their opponents couldn't grab their beards in battle. The good news is you can put away the flint knives and stop hacking away at your body jungles, because the new Manscaped Lawnmower 5.0 has arrived and it is amazing. I love being able to just take it in the shower, and as I'm a runner and a cyclist, not having the post-shave itch is just heaven. You can step up your grooming game and experience precision like never before with dual skin-safe blade technology, so you don't accidentally chop off anything you're not supposed to be chopping off. Hair today, gone tomorrow. Be a cut above the rest with Manscaped, and they are offering listeners of the show 20% off any order and free shipping with the promo code GROWTH, or visit manscaped.com/growth. Links are in the description. That's manscaped.com/growth to sort out all your hairy situations. The largest ever book burning in history occurred in 213 BC in China. Ordered by Emperor Qin Shi Huang, he sought to suppress intellectual freedom. Well, my sponsor Shortform are on the opposite mission. They are helping unlock the multitude of ideas stored in the world's best non-fiction books. Shortform is by far my favorite book summary app because they really care about information density. A light, fluffy book only needs a short summary, but a dense book with a lot of difficult ideas can't be summarized in just 15 minutes. Short-form summaries are built for the intellectually curious people out there who truly want to learn and understand things, and Shortform even have downloadable PDFs and quizzes to test your knowledge. Long story short, Shortform is where it's at. Listeners of the show get a free trial and 20% off their annual subscriptions at shortform.com/psychology. Link in the description. That is shortform.com/psychology for a free trial and 20% off an annual subscription.
One of the most important things in like modern life, balancing your drive to do hard things and being happy with what you have. Two thoughts there. One is that I'm an early stage venture investor, and what we tend to also think about a lot is like, how much capital do you give a starting company? And there is such a thing as too little capital, but there's also such a thing as too much capital, right? You need to give them just enough. So they're like, actually just not enough. So they'll have to be really scrappy and they have to be in almost that constant state of stress for, oh, I need to achieve all these milestones because I need to achieve those. And then I need to go out to the market, need to raise more capital to achieve the next set of milestones. And it's like a very delicate balance to find. And yeah, so that is something that I'm like learning more about every day, about what that right number is, and also how like the personality trait.
It's very situation dependent as well in terms of what are the things that they need to prove. Because of obviously as a founder, there's the whole like lean startup. If you go from like a skateboard to a scooter to a car, to an aeroplane kind of thing. You have an aeroplane in your head. You're like, well, cool, if you give me $1 billion, I'll build my aeroplane straight away. But you need to prove that people want to go from A to B faster, and you need to prove that they're willing to deal with risks and things. And you need to do quite a lot of different proof points along the way to get there. And it's just working out what are those different proof points and how to build the momentum of it. And some stuff, sure, there's a company that is trying to build Boom. They're building those jets that want to go across the world in 3 hours or whatever. And I'm not sure how useful it is to give them like 50K kind of thing. But so when they first started, maybe it's just one mathematician just doing a bunch of machine learning algorithms and stuff to prove stuff like, okay, maybe you just need to pay one guy's salary for 6 months to do a bunch of maths. But yeah, at some point you just have to go big, because if you already know the market would buy it, right? At least that's what your bet is anyway. So you don't need to do that. The rest of it's just building the technology before someone else does. But yeah, it's always situation dependent on the startup and the founders and what kind of thing they're building.
The second point around this topic is they always say that you are the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. And I think if you pull it to the extreme, what you essentially, I think, related to expectation setting and doing hard things is you can choose between, like, if you could choose, one extreme would be to choose 5 people that you look up to that have achieved more than you on a professional level. And choosing them as the 5 people you spend most of your time with will supercharge your professional success and your willingness and ability to do difficult things. And that will be good, I think, for what you achieve in life at on a more professional level. But it will always also confront you with the fact that you're less capable. You have achieved less than the 5 people you spend most of your time with. And so it's going to be a balance between you're going to be pushed intrinsically and extrinsically to do harder things, which is good. But on the same side, you're going to be happier and less satisfied just because you're going to be lower on the social hierarchy than the people you spend time with. The other extreme is choosing friends that are lower on the social hierarchy ladder than you, that are less ambitious, and being the more successful one or the more ambitious one of the group. I think that will reduce your drive and willingness to do hard things. And it will have a negative effect on your career. But on average, I think it will also make you happier because you feel more confident because you're the achiever. And you feel like you're doing really well because you're comparing yourself with people that are doing less well. And so I think there's probably a sort of formula based on your personality where it's either better to lean towards the choose very ambitious friends or choose less ambitious friends.
So personally for myself, I really having balancing. So I've drawn to opposites. As in I have some friends that are just very good at super chilling out and being like, cool, how much money do I actually need? I could just go travel and do fun stuff because if I'm only young once, versus the friends that are like, I'm going to earn all the money and do crazy stuff in that sense. And interesting. You're very good at, I feel, knowing what it is that you enjoy and just doing that, as in getting super high into CrossFit or whatever. Or you are very binary in terms of pretty full on in terms of, okay, you like keto, so you just properly did keto. So you super get into the thing, but I also feel like you are relaxed. I feel like you maybe don't waste that much time, but I still feel like you have freedom and you're not crazy overworking, but also very concerned about money and working out how to do that big thing properly. So balanced, but definitely working hard on the money side. And I was going to say something else completely different, and from what that was, we were talking about number of friends, how they influence you. Oh yeah. So what you were just saying was would you rather be a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in a small pond conundrum? And there was some studies on universities that often it can be better depending what it is. As in, if you go to a university where you are one of the best, but it's not such a big university, that can be really limiting in some fields, but in others it can be really good to be the best because it pushes you to keep being the best and do more. And you actually can have more success by just owning the market or something, versus if you go somewhere where you're actually forgotten about, you just give up. But that's very field dependent on what you're doing, and also personality dependent on what pushes you and stuff. But it's not like a clear-cut answer that you should always be surrounded by better people or always be the best.
So, very interesting data point, really good points. So I recently saw a graph of like average GPA levels or whatever, like test score levels based on the date of birth of like young people. And they found that people that were born in a month, which made them the oldest one in their class from a young age, had on average higher scores than the ones that were like later and like younger in the youngest of the cohort, essentially. And I think this is also a book or something that is discussed in, I think, Outliers.
Oh, there's quite a few things. It's even bigger for things like ice hockey or whatever, and lots of sports, where as a kid, you just get that confirmation bias. As a 5 and 6-year-old, you're always the best one. So you're always in the top team and you just enjoy it. So you work harder. And then by the time you're like 9 or 10, even though it starts to balance itself out a lot more, you've spent the last 5 years playing every day because you love it. And this person that was like a bit younger when they were 5 just stopped playing. And so in professional hockey, there's a huge swing towards people that were just the oldest in their year at the time, kind of thing. And I think it balances itself out a little bit more over education because you just have to go through education for the first like 8 years and you have to do all subjects until you're 16 before you even choose. But it still makes a big difference if you're at school and you get put into the top set because if you were older in the first year that you're there and you're just always in the top set for the rest of your life. Whereas if you get put in the middle set at the start, you just maybe don't graduate out of that, which is very unfair.
Which is, man, there's a tangent we can go on, but I'll leave that for another time. But it's not super relevant for the book.
My friend, this is interesting thing, was she went to this village, a little town where like the local school has really good grades on average, like really exceeds the average like public school. But then she found that like 90% of the kids there get private tutoring. And so she's okay, so does this actually mean that like my kid doesn't have any benefit from being in this school? It's just that everyone here is like a rich mum rich parents that just pay for their kid to have a bunch of extra tutoring. This is what's expected. And so I'm not sure if you actually get any of that benefit being around those people that are above you, if you actually aren't having all that extra time and work given to you.
So I would argue that in a way it's still like this still counts because in this particular example, I think cohorts are really important. And I think because like cohorts like sets expectations. And so if you're part of a better cohort, you're always going to try and follow. And so I would argue that of course, not everyone can have private tutoring, but I think a lot of people could have private tutoring, but don't see the value of it. And in a way, I think that it's, especially if we're trying to optimize for like academic success, probably a good thing to have private tutoring. I think like, for example, in Asia, everyone that can afford it does it. I mean, like, they're just very focused on academic success. But yeah, I think it's not necessarily a counterpoint, but it's interesting. And it doesn't surprise me that because others do it, others like it's this reflexive cycle where if one person starts and they start exceeding and now it's also one of the beat up of the class, so they start doing it as well. And so that just keeps growing. And before you know it, everyone extra listens.
There's really interesting points generally around successes and like the PayPal mafia. Do you think like half of the founders of PayPal, half of the founders that went on to do big stuff would have done that stuff if they hadn't been in PayPal? And it's just that you were in PayPal, so you're going to get written the check from VC and you've got some friends that are really big, expansive thinkers, so that also inspires your thoughts? Or is it something genetically in the way all those founders who were in PayPal thought that actually made them go on to then go and do those other things that would have happened anyway? And good.
I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. So from our conversation just now, it almost feels like we've talked about one big topic, but actually we touched upon a bunch of the stuff that Hause talks about in the book. One that I think is really important, and I think about a lot in my life, is the concept of permanent versus impermanent information.
I was literally looking at that point. Yeah, I had the permanent versus expiring information. And so it's what happened versus why it happened, and looking more for the psychology of things. Like I was talking about different sort of biases or psychology and things. And it's like, okay, that's what's going on versus just the actual event. But you might have extra information here.
Interestingly, it is the Lindy effect applied to it. There are from a very high level. You have permanent information and you have expiring information. Permanent information is indeed maybe like this book, right? This book talks about principles of like human nature and how these manifest themselves into daily life and how you feel and how you think and what you do and what's could optimize your chances for financial or professional success, or like what could help you, knowing your inherent traits, optimize for happiness. Expiring information is whatever on social media, whatever in the news. It is things that in all likelihood, a year from now will no longer be like relevant or have an impact. While a book like Same as Ever, like in 20 years, pretty much still going to be as true as it is today.
There's some books that definitely have like lots of information around what tools to use, like how things are thinking. If you read a how to use social media book from 8 years ago to optimize your marketing, it's not going to be relevant today. But if there are other marketing books that maybe are more timeless, like the 22 Irrefutable Laws of Marketing or something, that don't talk so much about tools, but more about human behavior. And this, if you read a book about how to use eToro for your investments and leveraging or something, it's not going to be relevant in 20 years' time. But reading this book, it doesn't matter if you read it in 100 years, it's just about human nature. And yeah, half the stories aren't even from the last 50 years anyway.
It's one of the reasons why I really enjoy what we do, Sam, which is reading books. There are, like, I've asked this question to quite a bit of people, which is if you had to choose between listening to audiobooks or podcasts, or like reading books or listening to podcasts, what would you like? And you could only choose one. What would you do? What would you do? I'll ask you the question, Sam.
As in, if I'm allowed to carry on reading books as well, then maybe I would go for a podcast, because I think...
No. Books or podcasts?
Okay, probably books. But I think there is some benefit in the duality of, let's say you're trying to read something like Nietzsche. There's a podcast all about Nietzsche, which like makes it more digestible. And I think you learn more from it, learning about it beforehand and then reading it, than just reading it and saying you come to some conclusions, but actually missing half of the whole point about it. I mean, there are probably lots of books that actually help you understand the harder books. As in, if you wanted to read about Stoicism, it's easier to read Ryan Holiday and then go and read like Marcus Aurelius. But yeah, and like, I do think there are some things that are really handy, like in the short term, as in like I like listening to some people who are just good thinkers about stuff, as in like the All In podcasts. Like it's just a bunch of different billionaires that are super successful and have some thoughts on things. Like I don't believe everything they say, but like they have some mental models and ways of thinking that I don't personally have. And same way, like it's nice, like I look into lots of stuff, psychology, you look into lots of stuff around investing. We have some different takes on the books we read, which is useful. But yeah, if I had to choose one, I would still just choose book. I'm guessing you would choose books.
Yes. And I think that you touched on really like a bunch of really interesting points there. I think one is that almost by definition, books are like harder to consume than podcasts. Podcasts are people talking. It's very like natural language. There's lots of breaks. There's lots of repeated sentences. And it's easier for us to consume. It's less dense. And I think that this ties down to one of the other points in the book, funnily enough, which is that all things worth doing all difficult things are things worth doing. And so I think that when it comes to like podcasts and books, as you said earlier, it's easier to start with Ryan Holiday, whatever, and then go on to Marcus Aurelius. But because it's hard, it might be actually better to just go straight to Marcus Aurelius. Because it is hard, you will have to put in the effort. You'll have to think about it. And I think that you'll be better off in the long term. Obviously, it's like this false dichotomy that I put you in, which is, you have to choose one. There's definitely that is optimal.
Let's say you want to take your kids to a museum in Greece. Are they going to learn that much compared to if they'd listened to some really cool book about the Greeks? It was just like some fun stories before they got there, and they actually were like able to appreciate this like shield they're looking at, or are they just going to be super bored when they get there? And if you try and read something hard and dense, but you don't have the frameworks, like the knowledge in there to even put it into something and use it, it's not very useful.
Argument. I agree with your points about kids, but I think that the difference with kids is that you have to massage it in a way, like you have to make it easy enough for them to be willing to do it. And I guess you could say the same for adults. Like maybe for some people that find it incredibly difficult to keep their attention to one thing, which by the way includes myself, like it is maybe the optimal strategy is to go for a podcast. But if you have the willingness and you are willing to put in the work, I think that the harder path is generally going to be the better path. And to your point of maybe it's useful to get frameworks first and then read or consume that like ties into the framework, makes it more easy to put as a blob of knowledge into your head. I would argue that the best books in the world are by itself provide the framework in a way.
It depends on like the level you want to go to. Because like Nietzsche is definitely harder to read than like the book. Like this book, Same with Ever, super easy to read. There was nothing difficult about it.
Okay, at this point in the show, Nico had his hand up waving madly at me because he wanted to make a very big meta point about the value of learning from the original source material and the importance of embracing difficulty in our lives. So stay tuned to learn who wins the debate on books versus podcasts, as well as how to improve your taste as a creator and our final lessons from the book after the break.
Super meta point about this, by the way, is that almost all of the points in this book, like there's nothing new here. For example, a lot of the points in this book come from some of Taleb's work, right? The concept of Lindy, we talked about black swans, etc. Quotes of other people, like all of these principles come from other books where there were books written about these principles. And before we actually started, Sam, you were telling me that this is a book that months later you think about it like, that was a good book. But then like you forget all of the details in it. And so to me, this book, Same as Ever, is to the foundational books where these concepts are like in itself, in a very long book, discussed and built up. Like, for example, how it takes Taleb 5 fucking books to talk about the concept of skin in the game, etc. So Same as Ever is to the work of Taleb as a podcast is to a book, where it's like more digestible, it's shorter, it's easier. And so, yeah, I think the merit of the value of this book becomes as a good refresher. This might be a book where you've read all of the foundational principles before, and then this is like a yearly read where you're like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, and I should think about this more, and I forgot about these, like our tendency to do this thing. But I'm wondering whether if you're a blank slate and you haven't read all of these books, how like this book is perceived and how much you take away from it. Really.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like you could have not read any of Taleb or all of these things, and this would be a fine first book to start with, because everything is, I still feel like it's written like stuff you understand, and it just makes you go, right, I actually know what you just said intuitively is straight away. It's great writing, and you don't have to have read that all before, but if you have read it all before, it's still great to get it like this. And he still makes some different parallels and puts it together in one section, or one sort of entity, which is really nice. And just the way you're talking about that, one thing that I think biases me personally towards podcasts is that my job is running a podcast. So in terms of my own like insight and taste making and creativity for what I do, it helps to listen to a lot of podcasts. The same like Mr. Beast only watched YouTube for many years and just constantly thought about YouTube. And he got to the point now where he doesn't really watch YouTube and he spends more time trying to learn from other formats. So I'm obviously still learning from storytelling from book writers, or just the way I watch a movie. I still think creatively why they've chosen to do it the way they have. But I still need to listen to podcasts to get that. But if you're not a creator and you're trying to think deeply, then I would think books are better. But it also depends on where you're at in terms of if you have a crazy hard day where you actually work really hard and the point where your brain is just fried. My girlfriend's an interpreter. Her brain is so fried by the end of the day. Like if you remember when you're trying to learn a language and like your brain just doesn't work and you can't speak properly, like listening to like just a chatty podcast that's just really fun and easy to listen to is, I think, totally a good decision for your life, because you're not going to actually understand anything from a difficult book. Yeah, it does depend on your situation, because some people just like being entertained. The same reason, like I don't personally find sports that interesting because I don't really need to know why someone who I don't know is able to get across a line faster than someone else or whatever. But some people like it, and it's basically a waste of time as far as my brain is concerned. And I have the same way with chatty podcasts. But I do listening to the odd narrative history podcast or like other thing that maybe other people don't find as interesting. You don't constantly have to be optimizing for always learning incredibly the entire time and doing hard things, but you should be doing some hard things.
I don't disagree with your point, but I'm going to make a facetious remark, which is, it's not a counter, but you'll get it. Never try to convince someone of something if their paycheck depends on not understanding it. It's like one of these foundational like incentive model like principles that are just like, it's funny. That came to my head when we were talking about, yeah, my job is podcast, so I need to choose. But I totally get your points. Yeah. And so it's, the truth is nuanced, but I think we had our conversation, I think, valuable.
If you talk to some like people in banking about like cryptocurrency and they're just like, absolutely, it's the stupidest thing. It's just a giant Ponzi scheme. And you're like, okay, so you spent no time trying to work out what it does other than like why it's a bad thing. That's funny. But I do think that what I said around like, the arguments for me listening to podcasts is in taste is an incredible thing that is really worth investing your time into learning. And like, as in, people think that taste is individual, but as in you talk to lots of people who are entrepreneurs trying to make a good business, and like taste is really important on like, what actually going on and where people are going to be going in the future, and learning whatever industry that you're in, like how tastes work in that area, I think is really important. And like Rick Rubin says he doesn't even really know how to play instruments or do anything technical wise, but all he does is he has good taste and he just knows when something is more good, and he really makes the artists make things that are better and good for them and pushes them in that direction. And obviously for any creator, it's insanely important, but also just working with other people and having an output that's useful. If you're going to have to write a project speech or whatever, it's still important to know. So whatever it is, the thing that you spend time doing and making is worth developing a really good taste for. If you're a founder, just writing pitch decks, you have to do that. But so like read a ton of pitch decks. Like your taste for pitch decks now as an investor must be so much better than it was 10 years ago, because you've read so many pitch decks, you understand what is the signs of a really good pitch deck. And it's one of those underrated things that people think they just have good taste straight away, but like it's really worth investing in. And on a tangent, I think there's lots of skills in life that you don't really get thought of as like useful skills, but are incredible. Like no one spends the afternoon going, I'm going to go work on my enthusiasm. But if you have friends that are enthusiastic, they're so much more cool to be around, or people to work with who are enthusiastic. And you have lots of things like that are actually weird to work on, but worth working on. Not in the book at all, but I should say it.
Okay, let's try to rate the book, as we always love doing. Sam, 10.
So I would reread this book. Yeah, I'm going to say 8. I would totally reread it. It was great. I do, as we were saying earlier, I think that Morgan Housel is an incredible writer, and yet his books are slightly forgettable. And I think he could do something better in terms of he's one of the best writers out there. And yet I think he could write something that's got a more fixed narrative across it, because of his so bitty. Every other paragraph is a different story or a different thing, that it's not, it's so individualized that it falls through your head a little bit like a sieve. If everything goes, oh yeah, he's totally right, you forget it, read the next thing. And I think he could do bigger stories and have a bigger impact in the long run on my actual thinking. And there's quite a few things that I've read from this that I will remember and won't even be able to attribute to him, I'm sure. But we read this a month ago. I'd basically forgotten everything. I had to read a bunch of notes. It was like, oh yeah, I read that. That was great. And I'd already forgotten it completely. Whereas other books, a month later, I have a more solid understanding of what it was I learned. And so like, I would fail to give him more than an 8 on that, but I would happily reread this book, and I'd probably be surprised rereading it because I'd have forgotten most of it. But it's good enough to reread. Yeah.
It's fascinating because I completely agree with all your points. Just to draw it back to Taleb, who we read 4 years ago, like a while ago, we read Taleb. Dude, yeah, exactly. I think about those like still almost every day. And it's because I guess then like the way he talks about it, the length at which he goes through it, I don't grasp yet how exactly he managed to make that such a hook in my brain. But I fully agree that Morgan Housel hasn't managed to do that. And I think that's probably a consequence of trying to talk about too many things. And it's almost like annoying that so many of these things are like, they're like related in a way that you can probably find a way to draw connections between them, but it's too soft that he can't make it into like, this is the connection between all these things. And I don't know. I agree with you. So I read the book like months ago, I think in the beginning of this year, so 4 months ago. And I had to read my notes to remember.
What do you remember from Psychology of Money? Because I gave my girlfriend that book and I had no idea what was in it. She was like, what's this book about? I'm like, oh, stuff. It's really good. You should read it. I can tell you that.
I won't forget, I think that like when you invest in a market, downturns and crashes are the price you pay to be exposed to them. That I won't forget, because that's such a good mental model. And that was, I think, maybe it is because that was the first time I heard that was in that book.
I've heard similar versions of that, as in the cost of entry, even for being in a relationship or something, it's just consider the fee you pay, and like things aren't going to be perfect and it goes up and down. So it wasn't completely original, but yeah, just the way it was written was nice. Yes.
Okay, so my score, it's tough, right? Because I think for people that don't read a lot of books, I think this is actually a really good book.
Yeah, if you're going to read one book this year, this is a great choice.
Yes, but then if you, for example, have read all of the other books that this book is essentially borrows ideas from and summarizes ideas from and makes the ideas, like gives them in a more consumable format, it becomes not much more than a refresher. And so I'm going to give it, because I can't say a 7, which is what I would give, I'm going to give it a 6 because I don't think it's an 8, but it is really easily digestible.
To the books versus podcasts, I had already read 60% of this book by listening to his podcast. And there are some good podcasts out there that are just the same information, just split up into 20 minutes as opposed to that. But there's lots of podcasts that aren't as good. His podcast is really good. It is literally just like this book, but little chapters, one at a time.
All right, good. That was it. Thanks, Sam.
And thanks to you, Nico, for joining to help me out. And thanks to you, the listener, for listening. Hopefully, I will catch you again in the next episode to learn some more ideas about the science of self-improvement and some little nuggets to make us all that little bit wiser.
Hello, I'm Vas Christodoulou, and I host the How to Academy podcast, a bi-weekly show exploring big ideas to transform our lives and the world. Our guests include Arthur Brooks on careers, Ruby Wax on mental health, Gabor Mate on trauma, Nicole LePera on healing your relationships, and many more. You'll also hear from iconic artists, politicians, and activists, including Naomi Klein, Gordon Brown, Anna Funder, and a whole host of other very impressive people. That's the How to Academy podcast, available bi-weekly wherever you listen.